Hi, I'm Monica Packer from About to Progress, and this is a growth spurt, a bite-sized way you can increase your progress today. You may know this about my family, but of our 5 kids, 3 for sure have been diagnosed as neurodiverse. And for some of them, more than just one neurodiversity. We don't really know where it comes from. Brad and I are neurotypical, so we're not quite sure what the genetics are, although in our expanded families, we can see how it may play out more in my side than in Brad's. But one of the interesting things about each of these kids is one, each of their neurodiverse tendencies are very different, but two, in one important way, they all have this in common. The way they see themselves affects the way that they behave. Now, I don't typically cross over in a lot of parenting tactics here, but this is more about how we can parent ourselves. So keep that in mind as I tell you a little bit about one of the ways we've tried to harness having a good, clear, positive self-image for each of these kids as we work on their behaviors. And I'm going to tell you about this with my most stereotypical ADHD child, who has really high energy, low impulse control, is fun and loving and happy, but also tends to get himself into some tricky circumstances because he's not thinking through things as clearly because he simply doesn't have that skill set yet. Now, not just with him, but a lot of kids who are like him, who have this stereotypical form of ADHD, and I'm sure every form of ADHD is similar, there's this certain element of shame that comes with how they see themselves, thanks to the way that other people perceive them as the quote unquote bad kid, as an impulsive kid, as a kid who doesn't think through things, really as a bad kid. And it even breaks my heart saying that because I see how easy it is for them to take on that identity, because so often when people are just looking at the behavior, they can immediately take that back to a meaning about who they are. And that meaning is internalized. And that meaning becomes a way that they see themselves. It becomes an identity, really. And that identity plays into more behaviors that supports that identity. Now, before I tell you what I've been doing to help with all my kids, but with this particular example, I first had to teach you about the progress cycle. And this is a way I've distilled so much of the science and psychology that we know about how our brains work. And what I want you to picture is a circle. And at the top, you have identity. And at the bottom, you have behaviors. And what you'll see in the circle is you have an arrow that curves around from identity to behavior. And then you have another arrow starting at the bottom of behaviors and curling back up and around towards identity. And the way you've got to think about this is the way we see ourselves, our identity, affects the way we behave. And the way we behave affects the way we see ourselves. And this becomes not only a cycle, it can become a cycle that makes us spiral down, or it becomes a cycle by which we can also spiral up. And this brings it all back to something that I've taught for years. I'm a habits and identity coach for many reasons, but the heart of it is this: identity is the key. Identity is the key to the choices we make, the people we become, to how we show up to our lives. Because again, how we see ourselves affects the way we behave, and the way we behave affects the way we see ourselves. So to work on this, what we have to do is a couple things, but I'll tell you the most important ones that I always start with each client. First, we have to get clarity on who we want to be, the type of person we want to be, the values we want to embody, the kind of life choices we want to live out, relationships we would like to have, the aspirations we would like to pursue and to fulfill. Who you want to be is who you are. And that is the core identity of who you are. And whenever you see little glimmers of that identity, like we talked about last week with glimmers, watch for the glimmers. Whenever you see any little sign of that identity in you, you have to use this one tool, affirmation. You affirm it. You say, oh, that's like me. Look, I'm creative. I am a leader. If those are some of the values you embody. Or, yes, I'm a person who prioritizes connection. I'm a good mother. I'm a good friend. Anytime you see a glimmer of you being who you want to be, and in affirming it all, you are taking on both sides of that cycle. You're affirming behaviors that support an identity, and you're affirming an identity that creates more of those behaviors. And that's how we spiral up. Because the reverse is also true. How often do you say things like, I make bad choices. I'm a bad friend. I never think through things. I always fall off the wagon. I am lazy. and your behaviors support those identities. And while, of course, we can't neglect that there is evidence out there to may potentially support those identities, the truth is that there are plenty other pieces of evidence that support other pieces of yourself that you are failing to affirm and thereby neglecting to confirm inside of you. This is a really big concept and often takes many sessions of teaching it to clients and helping them live it out. But let's just go back to 4 words that I want you to remember the most. Identity is the key. If you want to work on your behaviors, you have to start with identity. If you want to improve your relationships, your habits, the way you feed yourself, if you want to change the way you sleep, if you want to change the decision-making patterns that you typically fall into, if you want to change your day-to-day life in terms of who does what and how, the systems in your family, if you want to change and go back to school, or you want to change in your career, you have to go back to how you see yourself and affirm that identity and your actions that come from it. Now, I do this in kind of a preemptive way with my son, so now I'm going to go back to him. Starting back to the school year, he was making some pretty impulsive decisions. His energy threshold is lower. Of course, we all know how taxing returning back to school is for all of us, kids included, and he wasn't making the best choices. And this is when we fell back to something we started last year after kind of a similar pattern, and it was really effective and helped him. Each morning when I would drop him off to school, I would get down at his level and we would just kind of squish our cheeks together. And I would have him repeat after me. I'm a good boy. I make good choices. Now, I did this every morning as a way to recenter him to who he really was and who he really is, that he is a good boy and he does make good choices. And that the heart of him, that is who he is. That's how I see him. And that's how I want him to see himself. Not as a way to be manipulative of the choices he makes, but as a way to remind himself of who he truly is so he can make the choices that support that. And when he doesn't, when he falls off track, when he makes a wrong choice, that he can still come back to, I made a bad choice, but I'm still a good boy and I can make good choices. And that's how I'm going to fix it. Now, we've doubled down on that at the beginning of this year, and it is helping because if there's one other thing I can say about neurodiverse kids is that the shame is so deep about how people perceive them, that shame often takes up an identity of its own inside of them. And we have to work on that so much because self-compassion is going to be the way that they both accept who they are and how their brains work and also still make progress towards the person that they know they want to become. And as part of that, work on some of the difficulties that come with being a neurodiverse kid. So there were a lot of complicated things here that I tried to distill down. I'm not sure if I was totally successful, but let's go back to some important points here. Identity is the key. The way we see ourselves affects the way we behave, and the way we behave affects the way we see ourselves. Affirmation is a tool that we can use to interrupt a shame cycle and to shift over to making progress with that same cycle. And if you can get clarity on who you want to be and notice evidence that supports that identity wherever you can, then you are on your way to truly embodying that person. I'm a good boy. I make good choices. That's it for today's Growth Spurt. Before we go, I want to do a progressor spotlight. Today, I want to do a little private shout out of sorts to my girl, Sharon. She knows who she is, who's facing a pretty rough time with a dramatic health scare in her family. And I just really admire the way that she is handling that so classily and stepping up to the plate and trying to support her family member and herself in a way that is really, really admirable. So Sharon, I'm so proud of you, and I'm really thinking of you and hope things can go better for your family. Don't forget to sign up for the More for Moms conference. It begins October 6th, and sign up is going on right now at aboutprogress.com/moreformoms. Thank you so much for listening. Now go and do something with what you learned today.